Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 96.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and today I bring on my pal, Dr. Mike Gibson. We're talking about how to avoid feeling held hostage by your CAs. And that's not to say there's not a lot of amazing CAs out there, but in your business, you just can't be held hostage by any employee, let alone a CA. And today we talk about some of the things you can do to preempt that, and then some of the things you can do, unfortunately, if that happens to you. Side note, we've been thinking of all the either hilarious or great ideas and concepts that happen in the pre-shows, things that don't get recorded. We've got some great ideas coming down the pipe to record some of that material and get that material out to you. So pay attention for that coming down from Life by Design for Chiropractors as well, and enjoy today's episode, The Voice of Reason in Chiropractic. Mike, welcome back to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Thanks. There's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Oh, well, that's a very positive attitude, Mike. Thank you. We love having you on the show, and always in the pre-show when we talk about, or at least go into the details of what we're going to discuss on that episode. Sometimes I think we should just hit record because there is so much good stuff there, but we eventually get on the show and get to go through the content. This is another topic, and a lot of this stuff, guys, is born out of what's happening in our practices, with the clients that we're working with in the elite program. So this is real world stuff. And so, today we're talking about how to avoid feeling like your CAs are holding you hostage. And you might think, well, that doesn't happen to me. I'm going to make the case that it either has or probably is or does to some level in some way, shape, or form. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you said that, I was thinking, I suppose, different people handle, any situation differently, right? It's the idea of perceived stress. So I think you're 100% accurate. In fact, I would say everyone has likely felt this way, but some of us definitely deal with it a little better than others.
I would say this is something that has evolved in my businesses and my practice, something that I'll give you a credit again where it's due to help me get more objective in these decisions. I think my nature, and still to a degree, my nature is to hope that somebody will get better. I really believe in them. And of course, I'm still putting energy and work into them and their development. I think it's still hard for me to cut the cord, and still hard for me to say, yeah, this person is just not going to cut it. I always have this piece of me that thinks they're going to keep getting better.
Making me sound like this cold-hearted bastard. I'll just cut bait. And you know what? I mean, like everything, like you said, I mean, all of this, most of these topics that we discuss are kind of born out of our experiences and things we've learned along the way. And, all the things we're going to talk about today as a way to kind of deal and have a solution for these situations is, it's come from experiences that I've had and where I've felt hostage. I absolutely felt hostage, and there's still there's still days in practice now that, you have that sense of feeling that way. So it's certainly something that we're not just, speaking to you about, but something that we're experiencing firsthand. And I know as most of these things are, both you and I have experienced them, multiple times for a long time. And I think have some valuable insight to share about how to.
So if you can, let's talk about some of the attributes of what that might look like for somebody. Here, somebody's listening to the podcast and they're still saying, well, that's not me. What are some of the telltale signs that you might be being held hostage by a CA?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could, again, be very different for a lot of people, but let me describe to you the feeling I've had. And that feeling essentially is, and at the crux of it is always this, here's what I think in my head. This person is loved by all of our practice members. If we move on from them, my business is going to implode. Right? That's what it is. And it's not as bad. I think that's the biggest piece of it, where you just feel like, everyone loves them and there's going to be this massive backlash and people are going to leave because the front desk person is no longer there. That's definitely been a huge part of it in the past. But also too, sometimes it's a legitimate, if they don't show up for work tomorrow, Like, who's going to be at the front? Like, how do we operate?
Right. Exactly.
As an aside, I don't think I told you this. I want to hear something really funny. Speaking of that, which was really eye-opening, and maybe it's what spurred this topic idea, but last week, our entire office was away. So the other 2 docs and our 2 CAs were away. Everyone took the week off, except for me. I went in, and guess who was my CA?
Kristen?
No, 11-year-old Ashton. It was amazing. It was so eye-opening just to see. He did an incredible job. He got he would have gotten rave reviews anyway, a cute kid,
Sure.
But he did such a good job. And just, I only taught him a few things, but he did those few things so well that it was really eye-opening that everyone who came in mentioned it. And I couldn't help but think, are they mentioning it because this is not the usual experience?
Right.
So it was like wow, he was so polite, and my staff's very, very polite, but it was like he said, great big hello and great big goodbye, and he was just he was so energetic, and so it couldn't, and the other part was just like he's like, Dad, this is easy. He was bored. And we were getting a good kick out of it because we have some great staff in my office. But we had a good kick out of it because they were kind of feeling like, oh man, an 11-year-old can take over.
Right.
Sorry, total sidetrack, but it was
a great story though.
It was eye opening. It was really eye opening. And so, sorry, what was the question?
Well, we were talking about the attributes of what it feels like for somebody to know that maybe they are being held hostage.
Yeah, sorry. So, it really was like, okay, if they're not here tomorrow and you don't have an 11-year-old Ashton, who's going to show up to take care and process people and book appointments and answer phone? Like, who's going to do all the things that really, make your practice go? Right. And so it's that feeling of like, it's like, and we've all experienced it. We've hired anytime lately. It's tough these days. It's really tough to find good quality people. And it seems to be getting only more and more challenging as the times change, as they say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100% as usual. And that has been the feeling I've had. And we've gone through, anybody who's listened to the podcast over the last year has heard me talk about, the number of people that we've hired and the number of people that we've let go. And I feel confident in our hiring process and we've had some good people, but things haven't always worked out. And there's been times where we didn't actually follow the hiring process. I felt in a jam. I had let somebody go. I needed somebody to show up and start the next day. So, you kind of grab somebody from the gym. You're like, hey, do you want to work in the office? You'd be great. And you kind of go through that and you're like, oh, good. And a lot of it, as you said, is really born out of that fear mentality of, oh my goodness, what happens? And I mean, really, if I were to be very objective about it, as busy as our practice is on a regular practice day, if nobody was here, and I know this because I've done this. And as you know, I practiced without a CA for many years in my practices and had, plenty of volume. It leaves a lot of work to be done after the shift. But in terms of actually operating during the shift and having all the patients get checked and scheduled, it isn't actually that big of a deal. And so once you start to reconcile the worst case scenario, then you start actually thinking about the opportunity cost. And I think this is really where the meat is here to this decision is you might say, yeah, great. I'm totally frightened that if I don't stick with what this person's doing, even if they won't change, that, my practice is going to totally get, demolished when they leave. But what are you missing? Maybe you let this person go and maybe you go through the pain and the suffering and the challenges that come along with hiring new staff and training, because that requires a lot of energy. But maybe you get somebody 25% better or 50% or 100% better. And now every month that goes by that you didn't make that decision, you're suffering, like literally you're suffering and sacrificing. And there's a massive opportunity cost. And I know just in my own office right now, my staff right now is the best staff that I've ever had. They're absolutely amazing. The amount of work I have to do outside of checking people is so minimal, and it's been able to allow me to focus. We're more profitable. I'm working less time. I'm seeing more people, and all because, in many ways, I wasn't willing to make that change because I was scared.
Yeah, and I love that you used the phrase opportunity cost, because that was the pivotal moment for me. I had my first CA was with me for 3-4 years. And, after about year one, again, brand new in practice, young, I, didn't know a whole lot of what was going on, but, it was one of those things where it's like, all the feelings I already described to you. And so it wasn't until I finally made the move until exactly that. I'm like looking at this going, wow, this new person that we brought in is incredible, is certainly an improvement over what we were doing. And I couldn't help but think like how much have we been leaving on the table all these years when when I should have made a move earlier, right? And that was really an eye-opening, my first time, obviously, in that type of experience. But that's where all of these things that we're talking about too, that's where it all started. And it was exactly that feeling of like, what have I been missing out on? How much, we were successful, but how much more successful could we have been when I made the move when I should have?
Well, I talked about this in the Elite Doctors group last week during one of our live trainings, Mike. And if you had a chance to see this, I was talking about the experiment of actually going through and doing the calculations. What if you were able to hire up and that was just a 10% improvement, and that 10% improvement led to 10% more revenues? I mean, what's that number look like for you, right? I mean, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars a year. Right? When you start putting the number on paper, you're like, oh my God, I care that much about this person losing their job that I'm willing to sacrifice $40,000 and $50,000, maybe more.
Yeah. And I don't want to give the impression like every time you make a new hire, it's, you hire great and you move forward. Because
definitely not.
Yeah, like you take 3 steps forward and take one, but it goes up and down for sure. I'd like to think over time, I know this every time that you hire and train and go through the onboarding process, et cetera. I mean, you get better and better at it, and hopefully, because you're part of the equation, that you learn things along the way and you make better and better hires. But I don't want to come across as saying that every time is the perfect hire, but it's very important to have the processes in place to actually ensure that we minimize the chances of a bad hire.
Right. Well, it's interesting, and tell me if this is true, and it sounds like it for you, and I know it's true for me. You look back over the course of and not to date ourselves, Mike, but I was actually thinking the other day, I've been in practice 17 years.
15 for me.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? So if I look back, my first staff members, when I had them a long, long time. And now over the last, say, 5 years, they've gotten less and less and less. And now I'm hoping that this next set is a very long time and I've gotten it right. But I think what it's showing is that I'm much more willing to pull the trigger now. I'm much more aware of what is expected and when expectations are being met and not met. And so, in the first, let's say 15 years of my businesses, I might have let a couple people go. And, in the last 12 months, we've literally let, I think the number right now, we're at like 16 or maybe 16, 17 staff members go over the last, year. Now, hopefully you don't have to do that over and over, but I think it's interesting to see the evolution where you fire a lot faster than you did prior as your tolerance starts to go down.
Well, there's a saying, and I might get this wrong, but I think it's hire slow, fire fast. Right. And so, the reality is that you can, even with the best hiring system, you are going to have people who you may not see their true colors until they actually start showing up, every day for work. Right. And so even with the best hiring process, there's going to be times where you're going to make a bad decision and you may not get to see someone's true colors. And so, it's just, I think you're right. It's just having that confrontational tolerance and that experience to understand that, hey, listen, I'm confident that I can find someone that's a better fit, and that, my practice is all not dependent on my CA. If they're not here tomorrow, there's someone else in that seat. Yeah, there might be some people who are disappointed and they're going to miss someone. But at the end of the day, this business, people aren't coming here to see them. And so having that understanding, there'll be some challenges and some extra work for you to go through the process again. But you have the experience to now know, and the confidence in yourself and your systems to know that, hey, I'm confident that I can improve this area of my business.
Well, that's where the number comes in. For me, yes, there's this stress that comes along with, everything new, like something will come into my plate. And I always feel this slight irritation when a new project shows up on my plate. Like, right, I have to do this. Like, I'm the person who has to do this particular project. And it's that irritation. But then I think about it, and let's say we're talking about hiring, and I think, well, this could increase my revenues by $50,000 this year. Isn't that worth that irritation? Right? Like, I do other things for, $100, let alone $50,000. And so once you get over that and you start to make this decision, then you can move forward into the things to do. So guys, in the show notes, I'm going to put our team report card. This would be a great way for you to start the process, something you should do on a quarterly basis. So make sure you go there, lifebydesignforchiropractors.com, find today's episode, grab that freebie. Here's the two kind of silos that we split it up into. One is, how do you be preemptive? So what are the things we need to do to try and not have this happen? But then, of course, the reality is it's probably still going to happen. So how do we manage that, particularly the mindset when that does happen to you? So let's start going through these. Mike, all of you talk about just the highlights. We've talked about these before, but this is a good refresher for people. Hiring process.
Yeah, I mean, having one.
There you go.
Is a good first step.
Right.
And, they can look, different ways, and you can have different steps involved. And even for us, I mean, we have a template that we use, a series of, let's say, I think there's 20 something steps on it in terms of going through the process from start to finish. But it's just, I'll encourage everyone just to have one, right? Have a set of rules first in terms of, okay, if this person shows up 30 seconds late or 1 second late, if anyone does that, they're immediately crossed off the list. Having a set of rules, and that those rules can be a whole bunch of different things. Some rule people have are, if they've been out of work for over the last 2 years, then I'm not interested in that person. Right. Or if they're a certain personality, et cetera, et cetera. So just having a set of rules to know that when you see that person, and along with that goes, of course, a clear understanding of exactly who you want that.
Right, exactly.
So your CA avatar, if you will, like who is this person and what are the rules as far as hiring? Okay, I've got this person fits my avatar. They met all my criteria and my rules. Then therefore they are a good candidate and are going to go through my process. So the process is going to have multiple steps. I always encourage people to have as many hoops to jump through as possible. But at the end of the day, without getting into every single detail of the hiring process, because that could be a lengthy training, it's have a set of rules, know who it is you're trying to find, right? And make sure that you have a process, a series of hoops for people to jump through, and they got to get through all of them, right? They got to clear all of them in order for them to be deemed a worthy candidate.
The next one is one that I didn't have up until maybe a few years ago, and I can say it's had a massive impact on the speed at which we're getting people up and running and integrated. And, my last set of staff are great examples of this, but that's having an onboarding process. And part of that is just A to Z. What do they need to do? In what order? What do they need to learn? The other part of the onboarding is to set the expectations, right? It's really a cultural issue. So when you look at being preemptive, one of the best ways to preemptively address a staff member drifting off or moving away from your values is making sure that the culture, everything around them. So for us, having 15 or 16 people working here at the Life by Design Center, it's very, very important. It's not a 1 or 2 person process. And so we want to create that mentality of everybody moving towards the same thing, being brand congruent, and having an onboarding process is a really, really important piece of that.
Yeah. And I think that brings up another important point is that, whenever we're considering let's just put it so we're not satisfied with the with a certain team member. Mm-hmm. I think the first question we should actually ask is, have I done my part?
Sure.
Have I provided all the resources? Have I provided all the training? Have I been a good leader?
Right.
And because for a lot of people, and this is again why I think the report card that they can download is so important, because it is not only a reflection, and when someone isn't working out, it's not only a reflection of them, but it's also a reflection of you. You might want to say, it's 50% of the story. So, I think, again, that comes with experience with every time that you hire, and this is where the onboarding comes in. But I can certainly look back and go, you know what, there's some people that didn't work out, and I have to take maybe more than 50% of the blame for that, because I didn't provide them with the tools, resources, time, and energy that they needed to be successful. I've set them up for failure. So make sure that, you do take the time to be honest with yourself, look yourself in the mirror. And if, you come to the conclusion when asking yourself those questions that, maybe you haven't done everything you could for them to be successful, then step one should probably be, okay, let me invest some time over the next however long you want to set out to provide that and see where maybe things could turn around.
Right. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the same boat again, right? You're going to just repeat that process. So we talked about hiring process, getting the right person onboarding, creating that culture and expectations. Obviously, it goes without saying, training and consistent training, not just from a here's what you need to do perspective, but I also think the consistent training is just having an opportunity to touch base one-on-one with people. And that's something that when I got really busy with everything else, that fell off. And I thought, oh, my staff knows how to do all these things. And then I realized in retrospect, part of the benefit of the training is just them getting an opportunity to be around you and you around them in a one-on-one or small group basis. The next one is, and then to kind of take this a step further, is also reviewing individually with your team. Where are they at? How are they doing? Having them self-assess and grade. So we use a form the same as you, Mike, and having them determine, where they're at on that scale of 1 to 5 in all those different categories, setting goals for themselves. So, again, you're trying to preempt this difficulty showing up. And the final piece of that really is the confrontational tolerance that you alluded to earlier. And within that is having an escalation plan. Maybe, Mike, I know this is something you briefly touched on in the pre-show. When we talk about escalation, what's the point of that and what could that look like for a practice?
Yeah, well, I think to understand why that's important, or to even have it, more importantly, actually be effective, let's just take a couple steps back. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a few moments ago about the importance of creating a culture, expectations. That has to happen first, like in your practice, right? You've got to be very clear and get a clear agreement about what the expectations are and how this relationship is going to move forward. And that's critical, right? If you can clearly lay out the standards and expectations, and you get an agreement from your team member that they are going to adhere to those, then that's step number one in having the ability to feel confident and have confrontational tolerance, so that when stuff comes up, you can immediately bring it up and you can always reference back those original agreements, just like you would if a practice member was falling off track with their care. And then when it comes to having this escalation process, by the way, I think it's something you should have ahead of time. It should be as part of your hiring process, or as part of your just documentation about how you deal with your team. But don't just wait until something happens to decide, okay, well, what am I going to do next, right? Have a template. I mean, every situation is different, and I get that. But have like a plan. Okay, well, if something doesn't come up the first way that I'm going to address it, or something happens that I'm not happy with, what's the first step for me? What's step 2? What's step 3? What's step 4? And of course, that's one of those steps eventually needs to be, okay, it's time for that person to go. Right. And it's just like almost why the rules are so important when you're hiring. You desperately need someone, and they didn't pass all your tests, and they certainly didn't qualify for all your rules, but you need someone, so you're going to hire anyway. Guaranteed to fail, right? And same thing, and I've gotten into this, is letting emotions kind of get into it. And is whereas if you don't have this set process, this escalation process in terms of what to do when things aren't going well, then we kind of tend to get our emotions kind of take over sometimes. Well, let me just give them another chance. Well, maybe another week. We'll just see if this out, right? And it goes and it gets prolonged. And like me, 2-3 years later, man, why did it take years? How much should I leave on the table here? So have it done in place, but just so that okay, this is what I'm going to do when these situations arise.
Well, yeah, this is exactly it. And you just even saying these words, I'm having this chuckle because that's exactly what happens. Whereas if you've preset this, and this is where having that internal deadline we had discussed earlier, right? It's okay if there's a strike 1, then there's a conversation within 2 days. If there is strike 2, then there's a one-on-one meeting that's scheduled. If there's strike, and so on and so forth. And by having an objective criteria, you take out the emotions, because you look at the objective criteria and you say, oh, I don't really want to do this, but this is step 2. So I'm just going to have to take step 2. Just like if you have a handbook or a procedural manual and the staff doesn't want to do a follow-up call, it doesn't really matter because it's already documented, it's in place.
I just had this funny recollection. I remember, again, this was like 4 or 5 years into practice, my first CA, and I'd made the decision that I was going to let them go. I don't remember the exact timeline from when I decided and when I finally had enough strength to actually do it. I have a feeling it was probably weeks and weeks, but I can just vividly recall, I was going to do it at the end of the shift, of course. I was going to let them go. And essentially, I go back after adjusting the last person. I remember sitting, I can visualize myself sitting there. I think I was sweating. And I was so nervous. All day, all I could think about is how is this going to go? I've never done this before. Are they going to flip out? Are they going to cry? Are they going to throw things at me? What's going to happen here? And, and I remember multiple times, this is why I stressed out over weeks. I was like, oh man, we finished up kind of late today. They've probably got to get home. I really need to go do that. Oh, I'll just do it tomorrow, right? And how painful, man. Remember back as to how painful those 2 weeks were. Just every moment, it's all I could think about in the back of my head. I'm sure the care I delivered was awful. Having that process in place and just following it is so important. Just to make sure that it's you don't make this any more difficult than it needs to.
Sure. Well, I think that's really what it comes down to. Is anytime you're faced with a stressful decision or any decision which can lead to stress, the sooner you take action, the better. Now, when we get into this second silo, this is much shorter than the things to do to preempt this. But let's say you actually get to this point, along this lines of making a decision. I think a 24-hour rule is still probably a good practice to have. So in your mind, you think, that's it, I'm done. They didn't do X, Y, or Z. That's enough. We just throw our hands up in the air instead of just, bringing them into the office and making that change right there. I do think it's still valuable to create a plan, to think through what the next steps are, because as much as we shouldn't be held hostage by a CA, there are some realities. As you said, if you've got a 100-visit day lined up the next morning, I'm pretty sure you don't want to let that person go, 8 hours before that's going to happen. So a 24-hour rule, I think, is valuable. But other than that, the whole managing of the mindset, what do you do when it's time? The biggest thing to me, and I'll let you expand on this, Mike, but the biggest thing to me is essentially the reconciliation that life moves on, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be fine. The worst thing that could happen tomorrow, if I had 100 visits and nobody here, is that I'd have to stay later or come in the next day and do scheduling and, fill out some paperwork. And then we'd figure it out and we'd get somebody in the next week or the next week. And, again, it's just not as bad as you think that it's going to be.
Yeah, there's 2 situations I think like that. There's the one you've just described, and there's also the one when you're going to increase your fees. 2 situations I've learned over the years that I have, stressed about, worried about the response is going to be from practice members, how it's going to affect my business. And every time I do it, the stress around it has gotten less and less to the point where it's not there anymore. Right. But it's I'd say it was easy, but after the fact, oh man, really, why do they get so worked up about this?
For sure. And that's really what it comes down to. There's not much more to manage it other than that. And then it pretty much just circles back around, Mike, to the things to do, because you make the decision, you create a timeline, and then you go back through the hiring process and you try and get the right person. You have the onboarding, and then you train them and you review, and then you address things as they come up through your escalating system. And then you either keep them, grow them, or let them go, and you repeat the cycle over and over and over again. And I think the theme for today, and really what we want to pare it down to, is, and this is the word I just wrote down, for me, it's all about freedom. And, when I did my value system, I went back through my perfect life planner maybe a year ago, and I was looking through my values. And one of the values that wasn't there was freedom. And when I started looking across, what do I want my life to be like? What do I want my day-to-day experience to be like? And the thing that I didn't feel in my practice in my life a year ago was freedom. I was, in practice X days a week. I was doing everything all these other days. And the fear of going down to 2 days a week recently, the fear of raising my fees again for the 3rd time in 18 months, those things were keeping me from getting freedom. And so we don't want you to feel that way. And having a CA who is either holding you hostage, or let's be honest, maybe it's just you're mentally held hostage. Maybe they're not actually holding you hostage at all. And maybe they're just doing the best they can. And there's some other factors here, but there's no reason for you guys to have to experience this and go through it. And we've given you a template today. We've given you the things to do. We've given you the way to manage the mindset. And really at the end of the day, Mike, it's, pull the trigger when it's time to pull the trigger.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. And it's, hiring and firing. I mean, we can all do a little quick Google search to see the financial impact of every new hire that you make in a business. Obviously, it changes and fluctuates, and it's different from depending on the size of the business. Either way, it's expensive. It's very expensive.
Absolutely.
To rehire. So the mindset thing is huge. I think that is the most important thing at the end of the day. But also, use that checklist, download the checklist, and use that checklist to make sure that you do everything you possibly can to be, to preempt having to change staff. Because if the better you can do at all those items and having all those in place, of course, the less likely you'll have to ever get here. But the message is, once you get there, just have a system in place and just be as objective and keep your emotions out of it and just follow the procedure that you put in place for the situations.
Exactly. Follow the rules, guys. So go to the show notes, lifebydesignforchiropractors.com, find today's episode and grab the freebie. And as always, guys, thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.